So without further ado, let's get to Scottsdale Stories Rediscovered. Our first story is called The Name Game. So I was doing research about the area around Pinnacle Peak, and one of the newsletter items I found, or one of the things online I thought was an article by Les Conklin from 2017, and he talked about the Crescent Moon Ranch, and he put in here that it was built in the 40s for serial heiress Lois Kellogg Mowry. I thought, okay, that's interesting, and I went to the Four Seasons Resort True North website, which is at the base of the Pinnacle Peak. And it also mentioned serial heiress Lois Kellogg Mowry. Let me blow that up. Now, the first time I did this presentation, somebody thought I said serial killer Lois Kellogg Mowry. I think it didn't help that, whenever there's an assassin, you use the middle name, John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald. So when I said serial heiress Lois Kellogg Mowry, they instead heard serial killer Lois Kellogg Mowry. This is saying that she's an heiress, as in she inherited money from the breakfast cereal Kellogg's. And I did some more research on this, and I found out that I was pretty sure that this wasn't accurate. And I contacted this writer at the Four Seasons Resort, and I said, would you please change this? It's wrong. And she said, no. And I said, why not? And she said, well, we got this from a book, and we respect your opinion, but we don't really know you. So instead of changing it, it's still up to this day. So to correct this, I'm going to teach you something about it, and to make it a little bit fun, we're going to do this as a game show. So welcome to everyone's favorite game show, breakfast cereal or linseed oil? How do you play breakfast cereal or linseed oil, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. We're going to learn a little bit about the Kellogg family, and then you'll be able to decide, is it breakfast cereal or linseed oil? Which arm or which branch of the Kellogg family are we talking about? The Kellogg family tracks its name down back to a legend, a family legend, that after a storm in a Welsh community right there, the next morning when the villagers came out, they heard the crying of a child, and they found the ruins of a boat. And then strapped to the boat was this child that was crying. They unstrapped the child, and the child spoke a strange tongue that they couldn't quite understand. And from that, they decided to adopt the child. All the adults of the ship were gone. It was just the child was the only one left. He was wet, he was upset, he was crying. So they took him in, adopted him into the community, and they gave him a name. Since he was found strapped to the keel of a ship and he was waterlogged, they called him Kellogg. And eventually that was called Kellogg. The first time we see a recorded or a documented family member is in Debden, Essex, England. And that's Lord Nicholas Kellogg, and he was right there. He was alive from 1418 to 1493. Now, you don't have to worry about the names, it'll all come out later on. This is just giving you the history of the Kellogg family. Now, fast forward to about the year 1633, and Lord Joseph Kellogg moved his family from England. There he goes, leaving England, and he goes to Farmington, Connecticut. And the reason he left England was for religious persecution, and he wanted religious freedom. And he was married twice. He had 20 children, and that spawned a lot of descendants that are related to the Kellogg family. They lived in this area in Connecticut, and then eventually they made their way to Hadley, Massachusetts, and they lived there for over 200 years. Then around the middle 1820s, they started leaving. The first one to leave was Supplina Kellogg. He left in 1824, and he went over to first Amsterdam, New York, and then Buffalo, New York, because he was interested in the development of linseed oil. And he was very good at it. And by the time his grandson rolled around, his grandson was Spencer Kellogg Sr., the Kellogg family was one of the wealthiest producers of linseed oil in the world. As you see, here's the Kellogg family, their linseed oil elevator, there's ships, there's trains, all with the Kellogg name. Very wealthy family in Buffalo, New York. Now, you might ask, what is linseed oil? We really don't use that anymore. It's an extract from flaxseed. It's useful for natural oils used in paints, varnishes, stains, woods, preservatives, and concrete. It's also used in soaps, inks, and in the production of linoleum. The Kellogg Linseed Oil Company lasted until 1961 when it was sold to Textron Incorporated, and now it's a subdivision called Spencer Kellogg Division of Textron Incorporated. But today we don't use linseed oil for these things. It's been replaced by other items. Another cousin left about 1830-ish, and that was John Preston Kellogg. He first left and went to New York, decided he wasn't going to stay there. He decided he wanted to go to farming communities. So he took a boat down Lake Erie and ended up in Flint, Michigan. And then his family eventually settled in Battle Creek. I think it was Battle Creek, Michigan. And he had two wives. His first wife was named Mary, and she had 5 children. She died in childbirth. His second wife, Anne, gave birth to 11 children. So he had 16 children in total. And his second wife, Anne, was she was the brains of the outfit. When he finally started to listen to her and decide what to plant and business to invest in, the family flourished under her direction. 2 of John Preston's children of note, one was Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, and the other was William Keith Kellogg. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg was definitely the medical genius of his day. He came up with ideas that we still use to this day. For example, he found that diet and exercise were a very important part of health. And we're talking about in the 1890s that he was coming up with these ideas. But he also came up with some other things that weren't quite as well respected today. For example, he did electroshock therapy, and he believed for some reason in yogurt enemas. But enough of what he did was good and valid and useful to people that people flocked to his hospital, which he called the Battle Creek Sanatorium, not sanitarium, sanatorium. Here's a picture of it from 1915. It was a big outfit, as you can see, a large hospital. A lot of people stayed here, and he really couldn't run it on his own. So he hired his younger brother, William Keith Kellogg. William Keith, or WK as he was known, was the 7th son, and coincidentally, he happened to be born on the 7th. Kind of neat. There's one of the books I was reading, it said that he was born on the 7th year of the 7th month of the 7th day. That actually didn't happen. But he was born on the 7th, and he was the 7th son of John Preston Kellogg. So William Keith was running the day-to-day operations while John Harvey was taking care of the medical needs. John Harvey also did some parts of the day-to-day running of the operation. For example, one day he ordered wheat to be prepared for breakfast, and he gave WK very specific direction for how to tell the staff to prepare it. It had to be prepared for a certain amount of time and then put in a certain way. And in the middle of the production, WK had some emergency, some calamity in the hospital. He had to run and go to the hospital and deal with the problem. When he came back, the staff found that the wheat had spoiled. So he went to John Harvey Kellogg, the doctor, and he said, "What do we do? The wheat is spoiled." And Dr. John Harvey said, "Well, we're going to cut it into flakes and bake it, and we'll serve it tomorrow for breakfast." And WK said, "Well, anybody eat that?" And he said, "I don't know, let's find out." So they did. And it turned out that that was the very first breakfast cereal. And John Harvey came up with other things besides breakfast cereal. He also invented granola. But the definite big hit of this all was this breakfast cereal, which he called toasted cornflakes, or toasted wheat flakes, and then eventually it became toasted cornflakes. The two brothers had a fight over control because WK added sugar and molasses, which found that people liked more, and people ate it more often. But John Harvey felt that that was not good for medical reasons to have sugar or molasses for flavoring. He wanted just the straight wheat or corn flavor. So they got into this big fight. It went to court, and they at one point both pulled out their own version of Kellogg's cereal. And in the end, WK won the battle and in court, and that's the Kellogg's cereal that we know today. So both the linseed oil family and the breakfast cereal family were very wealthy branches of the Kellogg family. So if you want to know if it's breakfast cereal or linseed oil, where were they born? If they were born in Michigan, breakfast cereal. If they were born in New York, linseed oil. Who were their parents? If it was Ella and WK Kellogg, breakfast cereal. If it was Lita and Spencer Kellogg, linseed oil. So you ready to try a practice round? Okay, this is a practice round. It's not a real thing because it's not a person we're talking about, but let's look at a picture. This is a photo from E.O. Brown's General Store. E.O. Brown was one of our great entrepreneurs in Scottsdale. Got to Scottsdale about 1904, lived to about 1936, and just about every business was something connected to E.O. Brown. So here's the photo. If you look on the left, this building right here, that is E.O. Brown's General Store, the very first general store, and this brick building right here is the bank. We know this was taken after 1921 because the bank was built in 1921. It was closed during the Depression in the 30s. And if you were to look at this today, this building today at Main Street and Brown is Bischoff's Shades of the West, and the bank is now the Rusty Spur Saloon. Now there's even a photo I found in the library going inside E.O. Brown's General Store. You see 4 adult men at the counter and 3 children. And we know from descriptions that this is dry goods. This area in the back was where the meat was prepared, kind of like a butcher's area. This was canned goods. And then if you look up here, this is some more canned goods in the very top. You'll see a box of Kellogg's cornflakes. And so we know that this was after 1920 based on the box. And so you're probably saying to me, Bruce, how do you know that that's from after 1920? Did you actually study cereal boxes to learn this stuff? Yes, I did. So the very first cereal box, Kellogg's Toasted Cornflakes, came out in the 1890s, and he'd used this design for almost 20 years in different variations, but it all essentially was very similar to this. Then in 1920, he changed the design, took out the toasted and just called Kellogg's Cornflakes. And you see up here, both of these boxes, it says the original or the genuine without, has this signature because they want to differentiate it from John Harvey Kellogg's Cornflakes. So if that Kellogg's Cornflakes was a person, it would be, what would it be, from the breakfast cereal or linseed oil? Well, let's see how you guys do with this one. We are going to launch the practice round. Okay, so was this breakfast cereal or linseed oil, or you don't know? So you can see 21% said linseed oil, 74% said breakfast cereal, and 6% said, I don't know. Well, if that's your final answer, the correct answer is, of course, breakfast cereal. It's from the Kellogg breakfast cereal line of the Kellogg family. So that was just a practice round. Let's try the first round with talking about Lois Kellogg. And I think you'll get the hint of it a lot faster. So Lois Kellogg was born in Buffalo, New York in 1899. She was the daughter of Lita and Spencer Kellogg Jr. So she would have been the granddaughter of Spencer Kellogg Sr., the linseed oil baron of Buffalo, New York. Those were all clues of how she's related. Lois Kellogg, Dorothy Kellogg, got married and she became Lois Kellogg Roth, and she had 2 children. Then she got divorced, and then she got remarried and she became Lois Kellogg Mowry. and she was married Lois Kellogg Mowry for a number of years, and then she got divorced. Then she became Lois Kellogg Duncan, and that's where she was for the rest of her life. Um, Duncan, the last one, was a former mule. He was a cowboy, and they actually met on a backpacking trip down the Grand Canyon. So just to make sure it's abundantly clear this time, she left Buffalo, New York, and came to Scottsdale, Arizona. And when she did, she purchased 127 acres right at the base of Pinnacle Peak. And she called this the Crescent Moon Ranch of Scottsdale, Arizona. And she built a 4,500 square foot home back then in the 30s and 40s. And this home, she eventually used it as a finishing school for Eastern debutantes who come there. They liked it so much, they would stay there, asked to come back in the wintertime because they just loved the climate in the Scottsdale area. So she started building homes around the big house and people stayed there. This home was around until about 1987, when they were using it as a movie set, believe it or not, or for a movie location for the movie Raising Arizona with Nicolas Cage and Holly Hunter. Scottsdale features in a lot of different parts of that movie. It was highlighted in Joan Fadala's Lights, Camera, Action, Scottsdale Movies and TV History video that you can see at the Scottsdale Public Library on their website. So she marries Duncan, and she becomes Lois Kellogg Duncan. And he tells her about this incredible ranch that he grew up in. And it was this beautiful ranch. So she bought it and she renamed it the Crescent Moon Ranch of Sedona. She loved this whole name, the Crescent Moon Ranch. And I did do some searching. She also got involved in Eastern mysticism and religions, and she was big into yoga, and she got her husband, Nicholas Duncan, into yoga. And I found a picture of him in 1974 at age 62 in a yoga magazine. So it's the one picture I was able to find of him. In 1959, the Duncans decided to sell the Crescent Moon Ranch of Scottsdale to William and Dorothy Depew. William and Dorothy had run a business across the street. It was originally a gas station. Then they decided to do, in addition to selling gas, they decided to start doing convenience items. And then some of the customers said, you know, it would really help when we're driving all the way up north if there'd be some food to eat. So they started serving food, and finally they came up with a business, and the business was successful enough that they moved it across the street once they bought the land from Lois Dorothy Kellogg. And that business, some of you longtime residents of Scottsdale will know this one, was the Pinnacle Peak Patio. The Pinnacle Peak Patio had several different shticks, so I wanted to share one of them in one of my planned tangents. If you came in wearing a tie, they would cut the tie off and hang it from the rafters. And if you had a business card, they'd attach your business card to the top with your tie. And also, it's kind of cool, if you look down on the floor, you see these horseshoe shapes. You follow the horseshoe shapes to find the bathroom. Well, my little tangent is, when I was, one of my first times in Scottsdale, I was a winter visitor, and I was there with my parents. We were visiting my brother and sister-in-law, and my brother and sister-in-law took us up there to the Pinnacle Peak Patio, and they told me several things about eating there. One thing my brother told me is there's actually 4 brothers, and one of my brothers always ordered things well done. And they told me, don't order well done here, because if you do, they'll serve you a boot. The other story they told me, that my brother told me, who lived in Scottsdale at the time, he said that in the past year, his in-laws were staying visiting with him, and an uncle on his wife's side came to visit. So they decided to go to the Pinnacle Peak Patio for dinner. And they said to the uncle, we're going to a steak restaurant, so you have a tie, right? And he said, no, I don't have a tie. It's Scottsdale. I thought it was so casual. I said, well, here's a really nice tie, but you got to be careful with it, because, you know, don't spill on it. And I really care about this tie. So the uncle says, oh yes, That's fine. I'll take good care of your tie. And they wear their ties, and my brother and his father-in-law all put on ties, and off they went. Well, if you drove up to Pinnacle Peak in the 70s or the 80s, there was no street lights back then. It was absolutely dark. And my brother and father-in-law and his father-in-law were able to take off their ties, put it down without the uncle seeing anything to do. When they got in, they sat down. The waitress came up behind the uncle, pulled the tie out. He thought she was going to tuck it back in so he didn't spill on it, and she cuts the tie right off and puts it up in the rafters. And the uncle says, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and everyone else was laughing hysterically, thought it was so funny. Well, back to the Kellogg's. Lois Kellogg died in 1970 at 70 years of age, and she actually died in Scottsdale. And here's some interesting things about it, about the Kellogg connection, and things that are just interesting for Arizona and Scottsdale. If you go to the Four Seasons Resort in True North at the base of Pinnacle Peak, and you decide to come in, you have to drive in off of Alma School, and you take a look, the name of the street as you turn in off of Alma School is Crescent Moon Drive, named after the Crescent Moon Ranch. Now, another interesting thing that's not Scottsdale related, but it's kind of an Arizona thing, is the family decided not to sell the Crescent Moon Ranch of Sedona. They donated it to the Forest Service. So the next time you want to try a unique place to stay in Sedona, you may want to try the Crescent Moon Ranch of Sedona. It's about $200 a night, and you have to bring up your own food and your own linens, but check out this view that you can get at the Crescent Moon Ranch. I want to go up there just to see that view. I love Sedona. So now we can answer your own question, or we can answer the question, was Lois Kellogg, was she related to, was she the linseed oil, or was she breakfast cereal? Let's try round one. What do you think? Was she from the breakfast cereal Kellogg's or the linseed oil Kellogg's? Let me share the results. For the 85% of you who said it was linseed oil, you're absolutely correct. For the 15% of you who said breakfast cereal, no, I'm sorry. But thank you for playing round one of breakfast cereal or linseed oil. Now, so your final answer should be linseed oil. There's another person for round two. We're going to learn about Donald Kellogg. He was a resident of Scottsdale in the 40s. So Donald Kellogg, it's going to be another tough round. He came from Buffalo, New York, and he traveled to Scottsdale, Arizona. And he purchased some land in the southern part compared to Lois. He went more to the south. In fact, his area was just to the east of Camelback Mountain, and today it would be to the north and east of the Phoenician Resort, or the north and west of Fashion Square Mall. We would call it about Chaparral and 66th, 68th Street, in that area. Today it's called the Casablanca Estates. Let me show you a picture of what it looked like back then. Here is the photo of this original house that he built. He hired Bob Evans. Bob Evans built the Jokaki Inn, which still stands today inside the Phoenician Resort. There's two spires as you're first pulling in. That's the original Jokaki Inn, part of the Phoenician Resort. But here's what he built out here. This was an 8,000 square foot home, complete with barn and horse corral. He sold it after building it about 2 years, and he sold it to George Borg. George Borg was the guy who came up with the automatic transmission for cars. And he used this as a corporate retreat for his executives. It had an airfield so that he could fly right into it himself and then taxi right up into the main house, and people could stay in all these different areas that he had. He then sold in the 50s, and it became the Casablanca Inn. The Scottsdale Public Library has an awesome website And one of the things that I found in this was an old postcard. Here's the postcard of the Casablanca Inn. The Moorish dome that is built there is was called the Sultan's Table, and that was the dining room, a dining area. And just in front of the Sultan's Table was this pool. And a lot of famous people came in. And think about this, you could fly right into Scottsdale. You didn't have to go to a public airport. You go right to the hotel, land, and then when it's time to leave, you could go. So people like Errol Flynn stayed there, Marilyn Monroe, Clark Gable, Charlie Chaplin, and Betty Grable all stayed at the Casablanca Inn. It wasn't in until the 70s. It was sold again. And this time in the 80s, the inn was changed into a subdivision, and it was designed by George Christensen. There's a photo of George right there. He also designed more than 40 churches in the Phoenix area. So if you go today, it just so happens that March of 2019, this home went up for sale, this Moorish dome, and there's a picture of it. It was listed for $1.175 million. It's a 2,339 square foot home with 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, and the family room has a 20-foot high Moorish dome. Pretty amazing. To look at it from the website of the real estate agent, you can see what it looked like back in 2019. And here was the kitchen. So Donald Kellogg came from Buffalo, New York, and his father was Spencer Kellogg Sr., so he would have been Lois's uncle. So now for round 2, is it breakfast cereal or linseed oil? Which one is Donald Kellogg from? Voting is fast and furious on this one. We already hit 80%. So I'm going to end the polling and I'll share it with you. See how we did. 84% said linseed oil, 16% said breakfast cereal, and nobody said, I don't know. So you have your results. Let's look at the answer. The final answer for breakfast cereal versus linseed oil, linseed oil. Donald Kellogg was definitely one of the linseed oil. In fact, he was one of the executives of Kellogg's linseed oil company. Now, if you're going to play this game, watch out for some red herrings. Lois Kellogg of Palm Springs is a totally different Lois Kellogg. It's not Lois Kellogg Mowry or Lois Kellogg Duncan or any of that. She's a different lady. She decided to build her own home in Palm Springs, which she called Fool's Folly. And she was very wealthy, but she made her money. Her grandfather was Charles P. Kellogg of the Charles P. Kellogg and Company of Chicago. It was a clothing manufacturer, and by the 1870s, it was the largest clothing manufacturer in the Midwest. It had sales of $2 million per year in the 1870s and employed 2,000 people. The company faltered in the 1893 depression and was taken over by creditors, but Lois had money essentially for the rest of her life. There's a book about her called Heiress of Doom, and this is written by actually a University of Arizona professor. I did not buy the book because it's a very expensive book. But this company is neither breakfast cereal nor linseed oil. This one is clothing. There's also a Donald Kellogg of Santa Barbara, California. Now, when our Donald Kellogg sold his home, he actually moved to Santa Barbara, California. So he's the same Donald Kellogg that we have. He lived in Santa Barbara for 18 years, so they think he's their Donald Kellogg, but he's really ours of Scottsdale. But if you see this Donald Kellogg, he's also linseed oil. I did have a little postscript on this story. The original author of that article that I first told you about was Les Conklin, and I emailed him and asked to just present my case that it was not a cereal heiress, that it was a linseed oil heiress, and he published my email to him with the corrections and some of the pictures that you saw in this presentation. He put that on his email. And my last thing is to conclude this section is a request. If any of you know an executive or upper management person with a four-season resort, could you please let them know there's a mistake in their website and could they change it? Thank you. With nothing further, I'm going to move on to our next question, or to our next story. And this one is called A Promise That Made Wishes Come True. On September 8th, 2020, Mayor Lane proclaimed Make-A-Wish Day in the city of Scottsdale. And our original plan was it was going to look like this, where there was going to be a packed room of people there to proclaim it. But unfortunately, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic occurred and there was no council meeting that we could do live in person. It was all done. In a different way. But this brings up the question: why would the mayor declare Make-A-Wish Day in the city of Scottsdale? Why? What was the connection to Scottsdale? Was there some child that had recently got a wish? I mean, what did that mean? And most importantly, is this somehow a Scottsdale story that people don't know about anymore? Let me tell you. It all began when a little boy got sick on a drive from Illinois to Arizona. His name was Chris Gracious and his mother is Linda. She's now Linda Pauling. They decided Linda wanted to visit her mom, who was in Scottsdale at the time. And so they drove in, and when they came in, Linda's mom said that Chris looked really sick and she should take him to a doctor. And she said, well, he's just upset because he's missing his grandfather. She said, no, there's something wrong. Take him to the doctor. So takes him to the doctor. The doctor does a blood test and then says essentially to Linda, you have to go right now. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere. Drive directly to St. Joseph's Hospital. And a man named Dr. Paul Barenko is waiting there for you because Chris needs to see Dr. Barenko. He's a pediatric oncologist. Linda was sort of, to respond to that? She immediately drove over there, and Chris was diagnosed with a type of leukemia, which in 1977 was essentially telling you that you had about 3 years to live. So Linda made a promise to herself that she would put a lifetime of memories into 3 years of Chris's life. She decided to live in Scottsdale. She got a home off of 86th and Solano Drive. This is what the home looks like today. And although Chris was 4 years old at the time, he eventually he was enrolled in school, and he was enrolled at the Mojave School. It wasn't called Mojave Middle School as it is now, because back then all the schools was kindergarten through 8th grade. And Linda took classes in Scottsdale Community College. That's an old photo I could find. That's all I could find. But here's what it looks like, of course, now. And when she took classes in the community college, she found it, first off, very good, because she needed to learn more and more skills so she could compete for jobs in a larger market than in the small town she was from in Illinois. But I did want to, before we go into the rest of the story, a quick planned tangent. For those of you, do you know the name of the mascot of Scottsdale Community College? I'm sure some of you are shouting it out. Those of you who aren't from the area, it's a kind of a unique thing. His name is Artie the Artichoke. And a quick little story for why he's Artie the Artichoke. In the 70s, the Scottsdale Community College was trying to decide on the mascot. They put it out in a vote to the students. The students, many of them were upset that so much money was going into sports and not into academics. So they decided to sort of give a big little, oh yeah, to the administration, and they voted for an artichoke as the mascot. And the administration said, well, then we're just not going to, forget that vote, we'll do it again. So this did a second vote, and the artichoke won a second time. So that's when Artie the Artichoke was born, and that's still, everyone who graduates from Scottsdale Community College, their mascot is the artichoke. Back to the story. One of the students at Scottsdale Community College in Linda's class was a lady named Kate Austin, and Kate invited Linda and Chris to come over so Linda and she could study, and the two kids could play. The Austins had a daughter. And one day when they were doing this, Tommy Austin came home from work And Chris was a big fan of the TV show Chips, and he decided he was a police officer. So he had a toy gun on his hip and he had a badge on him. And when Tommy came home, he drew his toy gun and said, "Freeze, I got to frisk you. I don't know if you're okay." So Tommy freezes and he gets frisked and he says, "Okay, I just have to check you out." And he puts his gun back. He says, I'm a police officer. That's what I have to do." And Tommy pulls out a badge and says, "I'm a cop too." And he was a U.S. Customs agent. From that moment, Tommy and Chris were good friends. And after a while, Tommy made a promise to Linda. He said, if things get bad or challenging, or you just let me know, maybe we can make something happen. There's nothing exciting about seeing the customs office, but I think I might know something. So it got closer, and a couple of years went by, and the two families were very close. At some point, Linda called up Tommy and said, "If you could do something, now would be a good time." So Tommy happened to be on a stakeout, and he was on a stakeout with a DPS officer. And he shared that DPS officer was named Ronnie Cox, and he shared the problem, and he said, "Hey, if you guys can't do the customs office," Ronnie said, "we'll do it with DPS. Let me go talk to some people." So he goes back and he talks first to Alan Schmidt, who was the public information officer, or PIO. And Alan Schmidt goes to Ralph Milstead, who's the director of DPS. And Ralph says, "Yeah, let's do this for this little boy." If that last name Milstead sounds familiar, his son, Frank, just retired from being the DPS director. So they asked Chris to come in down to Scottsdale Memorial Hospital at Osborne, which we now know today as Honor Health Osborne. And there he was met with a helicopter. And the helicopter took off, and Linda was not allowed to go in the helicopter. It was just Chris getting this ride to DPS headquarters. But the helicopter takes off, and then Linda realizes, "Oh my gosh, I'm here. And that helicopter is traveling a lot faster than me. I better get there pretty quickly." So this is a little bit of what it looked like as the helicopter flies out. But Chris says, "I want to be taken everywhere." So they take him around and around and around and all over the valley, while Linda goes directly to DPS. So she actually gets there minutes before the helicopter arrives. So instead of being worried that she wasn't going to make it at all, she made it just fine with more time to spare. This entire flight was captured by Sky 12, which was piloted by the Channel 12 reporter Jerry Foster. And this is actually a picture on the left. This is Ranger 3, the helicopter that Chris was in. It was taken by Jerry Foster. And on the right is Chris Gracious inside Jerry Foster's Sky 12, and there's Jerry right there. When they landed at DPS, he was taken on a tour. They presented him with a Smokey Bear hat. And Chris was brought before Lieutenant Colonel Dick Schaefer. And you see that Chris has a U.S. Customs patch on his jacket. He was very proud of that, a gift from Tommy. When Dick Schaefer decided to give him a badge, instead of giving him a plastic badge, he decided to give Chris one of his old badges. And he told his wife the night before, "I might get fired because this is a controlled item, but that little boy's going home with a real DPS badge." So the next day, there is Lieutenant Colonel Dick Schaefer pinning the badge on Chris's jacket. And if you look at the picture, you see this look between the two of them. It's sort of like a stare off. Chris is kind of saying, "You're not going to cover my U.S. Customs patch." And Lieutenant Schaefer saying, "Oh, yes, I am. That's where it goes. That's where the badge gets placed." So he has this wonderful day. He got to sit on a DPS motorcycle. He didn't ride the motorcycle, but he got to sit on it. And at the end of that day, he was tired. He went home, and the group of all the people involved in this from DPS decided they got to do something more. And this story was on the news that night, and the next day, one of the officers went over to John's uniform, which provided all the DPS uniforms, and John told them that he would make a uniform for Chris if they could get Chris's measurements. So Linda takes his measurements. He mainly spent that day after this is April 30th, 1980. He spends most of that day just resting and recuperating from the wish. He gets his measurements taken, and John's uniform closes the business at 5 p.m. and he tells two of his seamstresses that they can't go home until they have made a uniform for Chris. So the next day, the DPS officers go back with Tommy Austin to Chris's house, and they present him with his own DPS uniform. See, there's Tommy with Chris on the left and Chris in his uniform on the right. So this is Thursday, May 1st, 1980, and Chris decided to go on patrol. So what would a 7-year-old do? You know, if you were standing there, you looked at him funny, you got a ticket, and he'd give you a ticket. If you stepped on a crack and broke your mother's back, you got a ticket. And whatever it was, he's just having fun going on patrol. This is a helmet that he was given from the Apache Junction police to look more like a motor officer. And while they're there, that's Linda with Chris and a couple of the officers in the background. And they pose for a photo. You see Alan Schmidt, the public information officer, Ronnie Cox, the undercover detective. Here's Chris, Tommy Austin, the U.S. Customs agent, Jim Eves, who's a sergeant from DPS. And this is on the second day of the wish on April 1st. On April 2nd, Chris woke up and told his mother, Linda, he said, "Mommy, I need to see my doctor. I need to go see Dr. Barenko, but I want all my police gear to come with me." So his uniform, his badge, his hats, they all came with him. And he was admitted into the hospital. Chris died on May 3rd, 1980. His body was taken back to Illinois, where it was buried with full police honors. In fact, two of the DPS officers went to Illinois to honor their fallen comrade. When Linda came back and the DPS officers all sort of talked about this together with Linda, they decided that there were more kids out there and they wanted to help those kids. So they formed a nonprofit organization. It was originally called Gracious Make-A-Wish. But Linda said there were problems with it. Unfortunately, the media could never pronounce or spell correctly the name Gracious. So finally, they changed it to simply Make-A-Wish. The original steering committee, the sort of board of this new organization, would select the children to receive the wish. This is actually Linda. Sorry for the quality of this photo. This is a picture. This is a VHS tape converted to digital, and I took a still picture of it. So it's not ideal, but you can still see that's Linda, and they're actually selecting the wishes for the third and fourth child to receive their Make-A-Wish. In 1982, there was a national TV show called NBC Magazine that did a story on this charity, this new charity. And after the show aired, the phone lines at DPS just lit up as people around the country wanted to be part of Make-A-Wish. They wanted to start their own chapters in their own states. And Make-A-Wish was incorporated in May 1983, and chapters opened around the country. Arizona is the first chapter, but there are some states that have to have more than one chapter because there's just so many kids and so much need. I want to go in a little very quickly into some of the things about Make-A-Wish. There's different categories. You can go somewhere. You can go on a Disney cruise. You can go on Disney. This top one is a child going to the World Cup. There's Disney cruises. There's whatever. A lot of these wishes, of course, can't be done right now due to COVID-19 because it's not safe. Some want to go to meet someone. They might want to meet The Rock or Miley Cyrus or John Cena or Mickey, Minnie, Peyton Manning. I also found this picture and I got a big kick out of it. Imagine the tangent I could have had with this one. That's the Kellogg in question is the child, not the Detroit Red Wings player. His name was not Kellogg's. It was the child, and everybody on the team signed his jersey. Most of these now have to be virtual until the pandemic is over. There's also a wish category to be a ballerina, an astronaut, a police officer, a superhero, all great wishes. They all have to be modified, but they still, many of them can be done. And the most prevalent one right now is to have, which is a room redo, a gaming computer, maybe your backyard redone, something like that. Those are right now the most popular. There's a lot of facts about myths about Make-A-Wish. I want to see how you guys do with that one. Let's see how you do with Make-A-Wish fact or fiction. Number one, children have to be dying of a terminal illness to get a Make-A-Wish. True or false? If you could answer that now. All wishes involve Disney properties or cruise lines. The government or insurance companies pays for the wish, and there's no way that I could be part of Make-A-Wish. And let's share the results. Children have to be dying of a terminal illness. 29% said true, 66% false, and 5% said I don't know. The correct answer is false. You have to be living with a terminal illness, or not terminal, living with a life-threatening illness, not dying of a terminal illness. Many of the children live, survive, and go on to become volunteers for Make-A-Wish. The second one, all wishes involve Disney properties or cruise lines. No, as we saw, there's many more wishes that have nothing to do with Disney, but by far the majority of the kids want to go to Disneyland. And prior to the pandemic, that was the most popular wishes. The government and insurance companies pay for the wish. And you guys nailed that one 100%. It's all, that one is false. This is all from local communities raise their money and donate the money to Make-A-Wish. And there's no way that I could be part of a Make-A-Wish. 97% said false and 3% said I don't know. The answer is false. Anyone can be involved with Make-A-Wish. You can be a volunteer, sign up, you go to their website and learn how to do that. So congratulations, most of you knew all about the facts versus myths of Make-A-Wish. As of September 2020, Make-A-Wish has granted more than 500,000 wishes worldwide in 40 years. That's truly amazing. There have been studies done that shown, studied almost 500 patients with the wish compared to 500, almost 500 that did not. And what this generally means is that people who don't have a Make-A-Wish are more likely to be in the hospital, that more likely to have more expensive medications or things. It generally means that those children who have Make-A-Wish have a reduced cost of medical care. I spoke to Dr. Paul Barenko, who was Chris's doctor. He's retired now. But one of the things that he said to me is you could always tell a child who had that Make-A-Wish because they had something to look forward to. They were excited about something. It just seemed to have their body try and help themselves get even better so that they could have their wish. So let's talk about some Scottsdale connections. So Chris was a Scottsdale resident for half of his life, and Linda Pauling is still a Scottsdale resident to this day. Linda wrote a book called Little Bubblegum Trooper. It's now out of print, but if you can find it in a used bookstore or find it online, very interesting story of how that first wish happened. And Chris' ride in the helicopter started at Scottsdale Memorial Hospital, which is now called Honor Health Osborne. When Chris went on patrol, it was at 86 and Solano Drive in Scottsdale. And the Scottsdale chapter of Make-A-Wish, their headquarters is in Scottsdale. In 2015, it moved to Thomas and 78th Street. Every year on April 29th, the anniversary of Chris's wish is called World Wish Day, where each chapter tries to grant as many wishes as possible in honor of Chris. So on September 8, 2020, Mayor Lane proclaimed it Make-A-Wish Day in the city of Scottsdale to honor the 40 years of wishes started right here in Scottsdale. And that's the proclamation. And here's a picture of the mayor reading the proclamation. And behind him, that's Linda Pauling, Chris's mom. And this is Elizabeth Reich, who is the executive director of Make-A-Wish Arizona, the Arizona chapter. So this is one of those examples, or one of those few times that people have said to me, like, why do you do these classes, and why did this whole thing happen? And this happened because Linda and Elizabeth and Jamie and I sat down and we talked about what could we do to partner together to honor Chris on the 40th anniversary of the Wish. And the city, Mayor Lane just jumped in to help and to declare this. And they've even made, as you see, they're holding the sign, a copy of the sign, the 78th Street from Thomas to the north, it now has an honorary designation. It's still 78th Street, but it's now called Make-A-Wish Way. And there's a sign up there if you want to take a look at that. And that's a close-up picture of what the honorary sign looks like up on the Thomas and 78th Street. And again, the mayor and Linda and Elizabeth holding the honorary sign. Thank you all very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed Scottsdale Stories Rediscovered.